Folks.
Well, I'm intrigued.
This is
like I was just telling you.
Yeah, this is a very surreal situation for me right now. So usually I'm like talking about death and Bitcoin. Those are usually just conversations I'm having inside of my head. So to actually talk to someone that wants to talk about both of those things and to talk to you is awesome as well. So
well, one, I can appreciate the therapeutic effect of getting some of these thoughts out, into the ether through someone in conversation. But two, I mean, of course, you hit me up when I asked if people wanted to jump on a Plebcast, and you said that you wanted to explore the angle of death and Bitcoin. And I almost want to say it's not something I'd considered before, but in some of these podcasts that we do, when we speak about or explore the kind of notion of Bitcoin money generally being a carrier for your will, right? And a carrier for your values. And the fact that like an eternal money, as it were, or a money that's can persist, can long outlive you, let's say, to what extent does it carry the values and principles that you imbue in it through your action in a market? And so, does Bitcoin kind of immortalize the kind of distilled values and principles of your action in a market to some degree? And now maybe it's kind of like, when a pebble drops in water, right? Like the first ripple is the biggest, and then it's smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And maybe that's the way in which when we act within a market, when we spend our money and the values and principles imbued in that action, maybe they, the biggest impact is the first people it affects, and then it kind of gets diluted over time. But it does cause you to conjure up this idea of outliving, or the values and principles by which you live outliving your physical body, for example. And so you hit me up and said you wanted to talk death and Bitcoin. I was like, fuck it, let's do it. So
yeah, I was having that exact thought over the weekend. So I'm a death doula. So
you're gonna have to explain that.
Yeah. So just like you would think about a birth doula.
Can you explain that too, though?
So a birth doula and a death doula, we're the same thing. We're just on opposite ends of the spectrum of a lifetime, right? So a birth doula works with an expectant mother to create a birth plan. They're often there with the mother during the birthing process, and then they do after birth support as well. So, like I said, I always say
like a midwife.
Yeah.
The first one?
Yeah, essentially. Yep. So I always say like birth doulas help people in and death doulas help people out. So we work with people to create end of life plans, like your ideal death, if you want to put it in those terms. We companion people through the actual end of life transition. And then we do grief support work with family and friends and loved ones afterwards. So where I was going with that is part of the planning process. Like I think part of the existential crisis that a lot of people feel when they think about death, like the reason why there's so much fear is people, am I going to be remembered when I'm gone? Right? People want to leave some kind of legacy behind. And over the weekend, I was thinking about Bitcoin, and it's like, I feel like the Bitcoin ledger is like proof of I was here, right? It's like that timestamp. I was here and these were my values. And it's like, it's almost like a time capsule of human consciousness, right? Yeah, there's a lot of bad shit going on in the world right now, but there's also this community of people that are coming together and doing work like what I'm doing, and people that are creating like decentralized healthcare plans and decentralized homeschooling and food networks. And it's like the death process is also something that's been centralized, right? I just finished reading the Fiat Standard, and it's like, Saifedean could put a chapter in there about fiat death. Like we have fiat death in this society as well. It's been completely taken out of just the acknowledgement as a natural part of the process of life. And it's been co-opted and medicalized and privatized and all of that stuff. I was with the Cafe Bitcoin crew on Twitter Spaces this morning, And one of the guys was talking about like both his parents died in 2019 and he's still going through all the paperwork and all the bureaucracy. And it's like, we can't even be free after we're dead, for God's sake. Right. So I really feel, I obviously work with people on a really practical level. Like, okay, you've done your will. And then there's this whole other realm of things that we need to consider. Like there's the emotional, spiritual, physical, mental, energetic aspects of being human. It's not just the financial part that you take care of at the lawyer's office. Right. So I don't know. I forget where I was going with that.
Well, let me jump in because I have a million questions. But first of all,
cool.
I mean, I really love this because I think it's fairly what's the word I'm looking for? It's kind of incontrovertible that, a healthy relationship to your life or to your death rather, is one of the things that helps to foster an optimized life. And if that's what we're all after, which I think is what we're all after, then we shouldn't just sweep it under the rug and just kind of ignore it's inevitable, right? And the fact that we ignore it so much, and then when it befalls us, especially if it befalls us in kind of a slow manner, it seems very fiat, to your point. Like it seems
totally.
Like all of our thinking about it is so fucked up, and we could be doing so much better. And actually, one of the things that I remember I was in Nepal in Kathmandu. We were hiking in the Himalayas with my dad when I was 17 or 18, and I went into this like little bookstore in Kathmandu. And Kathmandu's got all sorts of kind of mystical, weird, wacky nooks and crannies and stuff. And there was a book, and it was just called Death. And I was like, oh, that's awesome. So I got that and brought it home with me. And cause like, it's this realm that it is our inevitable end, and we know so little about it, and we spend so little time establishing a proper relationship to it. And one of the things that came on my radar, but I realized like one of the things, there's many things to consider about your death, but one of them is like, well, what do you want your final message to your loved ones and even to the world, broadly speaking, to be? And I was like, one of the things I'd be most afraid of, like if I was in a plane crash, or if I was drowning, or whatever the end is that I would regret not being able to say what I wanted to say to the people in my life. And so I have started drafting I guess what I'm calling a death letter, which is like, should anything happen tragically and like instantly, and there's no time to kind of come to grips with it, I would like this letter to basically to be my goodbye. And it has nothing to do with finances and that kind of stuff. It's just like, what's the most sincere message I can leave to the people in my life? And it's really interesting process of writing that, because it really makes you think, like, first of all, what is the most like distilled down version of you? Like what is actually leaving when you leave? And two, like, what is the most important, impactful, truthful thing that you can say to the people in your life? And what do you want to say? I mean, are you trying to be comforting? Are you trying to be loving? Are you trying to be, what's being stirred up? And I'm finding it to be an interesting process. But anyways, long-winded comment on my part. But how does one get into being a death doula?
Well, I mean, there's so many different ways I can answer that. I think now that I'm at the point in my life that I'm at, I look back and I'm like, oh, every decision I ever made, everything I've ever done has brought me to this point, right? Which is,
it's easy to connect the dots in hindsight.
Yeah. A lot of people can apply that to their lives, I think, but, death in particular, I became a yoga teacher like 10 years ago, along with like 95% of the population. So at that time, I was introduced to a lot of the Eastern philosophy and the idea of impermanence and non-attachment and all that kind of stuff. So that experience changed me on a fundamental level. And then my cat died, back in like 2015 or 2016. And my cat was like he was just my soulmate. And for a long time, I didn't want to say that out loud because I felt like a crazy cat lady, but I think that's important to say. He died a natural death in my arms. He wasn't euthanized. It was a thing that happened. And I was very panicked initially when I found him, like semi-conscious. I was panicked. I was calling all these vet clinics, like, what do I do? What do I do? And then I just realized, look, he's dying and you are his person, and it doesn't matter what happens, you're going to deal with it. Like, you are going to be here for him. So after that whole process, I thought, there I was at the time, like 35, 36 years old. And I couldn't help but recognize how strange it was that I had gotten to that age. And that was the first time that I'd been witness to a natural death, right? I'd been to some euthanasias and stuff before of animals, not people, and I just think it's so weird that we live that way. Like you were saying, like, we're just so out of touch with that truth that is always like, it's like one heartbeat away, one breath away. Death is always right here. It's like our closest companion. And yet we just don't talk about it. We don't deal with it. And when we do, like I said before, it's medicalized and privatized. So anyway, after I went through that experience, I was like, oh, okay. So that seed was kind of planted. And then as I continued to go through life, I've always been someone looking for my purpose, like looking for the thing I was going to do for the world. And during the last couple of years, in particular, I think our collective fear of death has driven a lot of the policies, mandates, all the things that have happened. And I was like, I have to do this. I was on Facebook scrolling and I saw this certification program to become an end of life doula. And I was like, that's the thing. So,
it's interesting when you say that it's kind of always right next to us. And I remember when I first had that insight, because you think about it as being quite distant chronologically. You're like, oh, that's 50 years off or 60 years off. And that's not like for certain, but that's how much space you think there is. But really, like it's just right beyond that layer or that membrane, and it's right there. And like you say, it's your constant companion, and it directs so much of what happens internally. And as a result of that in our life, like you said, over the last 2 years, like if you really don't have a healthy relationship with your own mortality, and if you really fear death and all the different components of it, then that's going to dramatically impact your life and your anxiety and what you choose to do and what you choose not to do, and the opinions and the perspective that you generate and the way you vote and the way like all that kind of stuff. And I've talked a fair bit lately and have always been very interested in the different cultures and their practices for basically coming to grips or establishing a better relationship with mortality. Now, that can involve certain substances. It can involve certain practices. It can involve, a ton of different things to basically just try to get people to a place where they have a healthier perspective there. And now, usually those practices involve some element of being able to differentiate between like the constructed identity self and quote unquote eternal self. But and like, of course, this is woo-woo language, and I feel like I'm speaking to someone who's going to be receptive to that. But it's like I feel like
my neck is going to be sore afterwards because I'm just like nodding, like, yeah, you got it.
right. But it's so important, because once you do that, then I think that releases the grip, and most often the subconscious grip that the fear of death has on things. Because if you can experience a type of death, right? If you can experience an ego death, then I think you gain an appreciation. And this very much like shows up in the letter that I'm currently writing. It's like, well, what about you is going away, and what about you is staying? And this kind of goes back to how we open it, right? It's like, all the, your name and your preferences and all that kind of stuff goes away, right? But the things the things that you were most trying to embody, the principles or values that you're basically trying to transmute from wherever their source is through you, those don't go away. You know, the vessel that was you, that is the means by which they're expressed into the world, that goes away, but they're no more diminished than before you were around, and they're, you know, and they'll be represented again afterwards. And what I think is important and kind of ties into the money piece is that to the extent that you use yourself as a means of transmuting those principles and values into the world when you're alive, as well as through your actions and through the principles carried in how your actions are represented in a market, i.e. money, then you enhance or expand the extent to which they exist in the interpersonal world. And that's good, you know? And so for that reason, like, I think a lot of us are probably have a perspective that end of life, even though it's sad, there should be a celebratory component of it as well, right? Because you're basically saying, like, this person was around and this is what they represented at a fundamental level. And should we not celebrate the fact that happened? And we're so far from that today. And I mean, when you say that you took this course, I mean, how much are you hamstrung just by regulations around death and dying? Because I presume that, like, even if we talk about all these different things that we could think of that would help both that relationship and that transition, would there not be a lot of, like, red tape getting in the way of doing novel things in that department?
Well, the death doula industry, if you can call it that right now, it's kind of the Wild West at the moment, which I really like. There's not really a governing body, which, you know, depending on how you look at that, is good or bad, right? For some people, it is what it is. I mean, we don't do anything medical, and we don't do anything legal. So our number one job is really just to support people and coach them and advocate for them. Like, my mission really is just to help people clarify their values. Just like you were saying, like, what are your values? What has brought meaning into your life? And how do you want to go out, and how do you want to be remembered? Right. So, there really isn't any legal type stuff at this point. And depending on how the next 5 to 10 years go, maybe it'll stay that way. Maybe it won't. I'm not sure, but.
Why do you think, I mean, you speak with a lot of people, presumably at the end of their life, like, what do you think the fear of mortality is all about? Like, what do you think's happening in that dynamic that it's so, that's so important or influential in people?
Yeah. And, you know, my thoughts on this have changed the more time I spend in this space, and the more of these kinds of conversations I have when I do get the chance to have them. And I think, yeah, it's fear of the actual physical process of death. Like, is it going to hurt? Am I going to be in pain? Maybe there's fear for what comes after. You know, if you subscribe to any specific religious dogma, you know, maybe there's some kind of like, oh God, am I going to go to hell or heaven? What I think it is for most people is fear of regret. Fear of regret. Like, am I going to be on my deathbed full of regret for the things that I didn't do, or the things that I didn't say, or, you know, the shame or the guilt or the anger that I held on to for so long? Because, you know, the point is, like, whatever you don't deal with over the course of your life, you are going to deal with it at the end. So it's a matter of, do you want to be proactive in that process, or do you want to be reactive? Right. And I mean, death is challenging enough as it is for even the most, you know, enlightened person, if you want to put it that way. But, you know, if you arrive at the end with a lot of emotional baggage and regret, it's like, it's not only going to cause the person passing away more suffering, it's going to cause the people around them a lot of suffering as well. Right. So, yeah.
So is the work you do, is it primarily with people already at the end of their life, or is it like, could be with a random 30-year-old who's just starting to prepare for that? Because it sounds like there's a lot to be derived from starting early, as it were, in that process.
Totally. Yeah. And that's, and that's kind of a direction I can see this work going in. Like I think you were kind of alluding to this earlier, but, accepting your death, just recognizing the truth that you are going to die, and this letter that you're writing, you're like, well, if I want to say these things at the end, I should probably say them now. Right. Like death gives us that actual motivation that we need. Like I call it living a death-informed life. Like if there's nothing else is going to motivate you more than death to do the things you want to do, say the things you want to say, and to take risks, like take more chances. Like it really doesn't matter what you do while you're here, because you're going to die anyways. So it's like, you might as well go and do something that just makes you feel like you're coming alive. Right.
Yeah.
So, and in actually doing the work to plan for your death, I have a saying, like, what matters at the end is what matters now. So if you want a certain set of circumstances to surround your death, okay, well, how do we reverse engineer from that place and bring our lives into alignment so that we actually have that experience, right? Because planning without execution is just, well, you might as well have not have wasted any time planning.
Yeah. I was I went down to the Amazon in 2008 for the first time. Like I was going to poke around and learn about ayahuasca and all that jazz. And prior, I was in this town called Iquitos, which is like the main.
I've been there.
Right. So, and
also
so
for the same reason.
Right. And did you go to the Yellow Rose? Is that what it's called? It's like a Texan barbecue place, like right before the.
I don't think so.
Okay, well, it's like a famous expat like place where everybody goes, run by some crazy dude, but and it's right, like I think it's the street that goes down to the riverbank, where the promenade, like kind of promenade thing is. I can't remember it too clearly. It was a long time ago now, but what I do remember is, as amazing as that whole thing was, like going to the shaman's village and having ceremonies and learning all about that stuff, like I still reflect back on the time, and I wonder what I'm coming to is that at that barbecue place, prior to going into the jungle, I, on two separate occasions, 2 separate nights, just wound up sitting down, and at the table next to me was an older guy, and we struck up a conversation, and it turned out that one of them was end of his life dying with AIDS. The other one was end of his life dying with cancer. And they were both down in the jungle, kind of for 2 reasons. One, to see if anything miraculous might happen and they could be saved, but more so to come to grips with their death and like kind of orient themselves properly for whatever comes afterwards. And obviously, ayahuasca and the psychedelic plants can be helpful in that domain. And I felt that those conversations, like we sat there and talked for like 5 hours, and they were so impactful for me because those guys had no like ego left in them, right? I mean, they were about to die. They didn't care about what they said. They didn't care about what you thought about them. They had obviously done a lot of considering about their life and their mortality at that point because they were so close to death. And they were some of the best conversations I've ever had in my life because they were so genuine and insightful and wise and that kind of thing. And I'm wondering from your perspective, and again, I'm not sure what the mix for you is of like people that are at the end versus way presumably very far away from that. But what have those conversations been like for you? There must be some powerful impact there.
Yeah. Well, and this is all fairly new for me as well, being in this space. So my experience up to this point has been mostly people who are at the age of the caregiving. So like 50s, 60s, and doing their own work, doing their own planning so that they can, obviously have their own plan, have a better understanding of themselves, and then also be able to step into that space of being a caregiver. And being with those people, even if they haven't done their own planning. Right. So, but yeah, I mean, the soul self and the ego self, like nothing's going to bring you to that point faster than a terminal illness will. Maybe psychedelics, sure. There's, conversations like we're having, all of those things are informative. But it's kind of one of those things, like it's easy to be cerebral about it and be like, oh yeah, okay, that makes sense. But until it actually affects you and you're like, holy shit, the clock is really ticking. And some people, like those gentlemen you met, look outside of the Western medical community and explore in different ways. And other people react with a lot of anger. And again, it's kind of like, I had this thought, and it's like, what if the purpose of life is just to learn how to die, right? Like to prepare us to get to that place. So, you're going to work through it at some point, however it happens to come. So I consider myself lucky that I'm going through it now, and I'm being that person for other people. Yeah, I think I had a little bit sidetracked there.
The Eleusinian mysteries. I mean, if you wanted to sum up their purpose in one statement, they would always describe it as a ritual for allowing you to die before you die.
Yeah,
and,
exactly.
And as a result of that institution was held up as the thing that held up the classical Greek culture and revivified it, and was, people that experienced it, historians and leaders and philosophers and all that kind of stuff, referred to it as being fundamental or instrumental to the flourishing of that culture. And it preceded that culture, and it had also survived since the downfall of that culture in various pockets, underground and overground, and all the rest of it. And anyone who's had those kind of self-annihilating experiences, I think can understand why that is. Well, why do you think, and I will tie this into Bitcoin at some point and money, but like, why do you think it is that there's so much fear surrounding death? Because I mean, even today, you like, maybe to stereotype hugely, like you have the Silicon Valley billionaire who like wants to figure out how to live forever.
Yeah.
And then you have other people that are content with, being alive while they're alive and passing the torch and, going back to dust when the time is right. And I think there's a reason why, whatever you ascribe or subscribe to in terms of, notions of afterlife, I do think there's a reason why in so many different cultures and myths and religions and spiritual practices, there's this notion of judgment, at death. And back to what you were saying, like perhaps the reason for life is kind of figuring out how to die well, or at least like that is that's when that's when everything gets summed up, right? It's like, how did you do at this thing leading to this final point? And I don't have any keen perspective on what happens afterwards, but I think it's a helpful idea or notion in order to help you orient yourself while you're living, right? I think that's, part of the thing. Now, when you invoke fear and institutionalized bodies for stewarding all this, then you get into problems of corruption and all the rest of it. But I think there's something to it. So why do you think this is such a fear for people?
Well, along with many other things over the 20th century, a lot of our societal norms shifted and evolved. And, in the 20th century, there was a massive shift of where people lived. Like people moved from rural communities to urban communities. We used to die at home. We used to die in our bed, and we'd be surrounded by our neighbor community, and you'd grieve and you'd take care of your own burial, and that was it, right? So it was just normal. It was part of life. And then as we moved into cities, we lost that community, and became like the nuclear family. So the number of people we relied on shrank considerably, which seems counterintuitive given that you're surrounded by more people, but you're surrounded by less community. And then in Canada, we universal healthcare, for all of the good it's done. It's like I said, it's medicalized death. So instead of dying at home, you die in the hospital. And I think there's just a massive chunk of, like I was saying earlier, like the truth of life that is missing from a lot of people's experiences. For most kids, it's like a grandparent is the first death that you experience, but you don't actually experience it. Grandma's at home one day and then goes into the hospital. And then the next time you see her, she's lying in a casket made up to look like she's still alive, which like that in and of itself is kind of insane. Right. So you just get this sense as a kid, at least I did. I don't know what your experience was like, but you get this sense that there's something else going on here, right? Like there's some kind of truth. There's something happening that just doesn't feel right, but you're a kid, so you don't really know how to express it. So I think we all kind of carry that. Things that are shrouded in mystery are scary, right? It's kind of how our brains are built. Just like with Bitcoin, if you don't know about it, you're scared of it because it's like, what is this thing that we don't talk about that I don't understand? So I think, from a societal level, it definitely doesn't do us any favors that we don't talk about it, that it happens in hospitals and it doesn't happen at home. And then all the other stuff we've talked about, like fear of regret, what happens next? Have I lived a life true to myself? I had a discussion in my community last week about the top 5 regrets of the dying. And it's like, you can extrapolate every single one of those also to, I'm like, oh, well, Bitcoin fixes that. It's crazy. It's like, and at the same time, it's all part of the process, right? Like we had to go through, we're just so disconnected from our true nature as nature, right? And we move to cities, we live in these buildings, we're not connected to nature. Like there's just so much that we've like this collective amnesia, right? So we all know it's there. It's the elephant in the room that nobody talks about. So, well, if no one's talking about it, then it must be really scary. If everyone's avoiding it, it must be something that I should avoid too. So we get into this like collective headspace that death is bad. And again, I think like nothing illuminated that more than the last 2 years. It's like, look at everything we sacrificed in order to keep death at bay. But it's like, people die all the time, It was just such a bizarre experience and experiment to wake up. And every morning on the news, you see these numbers of people getting sick and these numbers of people dying. And that's all everyone can talk about. And it's like, thousands of people get sick and die every day anyways. Like, what are we doing? And we're afraid of that truth for some reason. So that's why these conversations are so important. Like that's step number 1, as far as I'm concerned, is just to normalize it. Like it's okay. It's okay to talk about it. It doesn't mean that talking about death means that you want to die or that you're suicidal. Like there's a lot of stigma around it, right?
Yeah.
I used to work in restaurants and I find these little opportunities to insert death in a funny way. At least to me, it's funny. And, people would say
what can I get you guys? We're all going to die someday. You know that, right?
This could be your last meal. What would you like? Exactly though. Right. And that's the truth. Yeah. That is the truth. But people would say, oh, you're so negative. You're always talking about death. And I'm like, it's not negative to talk about what's real, right? Like that's just honesty. That's just transparency. That's part of having a full human experience, is to talk about what's actually going on.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
And to that point, I mean, what we've been exploring is like developing a healthier relationship with mortality. If you're going to do that, you need to alleviate the collective anxiety that people have. And these are all different ways of doing that. And that's why, this statement, like if it saves one life, has been so gross to me over the course of the last 2 years, because like, what do you mean? Like, if we can just hang on to one more life, it means we give up all the things that actually imbue life with its very meaning and value. That's what you're saying? Just so like one more meat sack can stay around for however much longer, and we give away everything that imbues life with its meaning, or at least, that's kind of the notion of the argument. It's so asinine.
I know.
And, I think there's a few things that in response to that. One, of course, like, a government run medical system, I have many critiques, but one of them in this case is that it can't respond to the needs or the demands of people at the end of their life. Like they're imposing what they think the response or the treatment or the care should be, right? Because they're not dynamic and adaptable like a privately run business would be, and the different incentives it have. It said, oh, well, our job is to keep people alive as long as possible. Now, to be kind of fair to them, which I don't like, they're deserving of a lot of criticism, but to be kind of fair, I think, and this may be, partially due to the relative diminution of the importance of religion and spirituality over the last 100 years in global culture, largely speaking, is that we've become more materialist. And so I think, people have this sense of like, well, if the material is all there is, or if at least the balance the scales have shifted to having more people think that way, or think more that way, then it should be expected that people are going to want to hang on to their material self, because they're not that connected with any other aspect of their self or any other aspect of nature or the world. And also, I think that that induces a greater egotism in people. It's like, well, myself and my experience of the world is all there is. And this is greatly exacerbated, of course, by fiat and big governments and all the rest of it. But this whole material notion, I think, induces a greater egotism than there might be. Because, of course, if you have any sort of spiritual orientation, then part of that is being humble in the face of the grander energy, force, God that you are in relationship with. And if you don't have that, then I think that distills everything down to just, oh my God, I am it. And as a result, you see people hanging on to every single last breath, and when I've had relatives that have been sick, you go into the hospitals, and I mean, lovely people and nurses are some of the most like hardworking and humble people there are, and they have to deal with like stuff that I could never even dream of dealing with on a daily basis. But there's such horrible environments. Like you go in there and it's just like, ugh. And you see people and it's like, they literally, I mean, their brain is not there. Their body's not there. They have lost all function, but their heart's still beating and their lungs are still pumping air. And so we maintain it. And like, surely, and this is why I think your like work, like the work that you're involved in, is so important, because we have to come to a better process for ending life, right? Because just waiting, and not only cost is the least consideration, just the humanity of it, both for yourself and for your loved ones, that the whole objective is just to draw one breath so you can check out at 84 instead of 79. Why? The length of life is not the primary metric that we should be judging it by, right? And so it's so it's all so perverted. But what are your thoughts of how the monetary system, both on the negative side and the positive side, has influenced this kind of stuff?
Oh my God. That's such a massive
and anything you want to respond to what I said.
It's like my head's going to explode with, how many things I want to say about that.
Go for it.
Well, going back to where we started from, again, like everything we've sacrificed over the last couple of years just to not lose people. And yet, we've got more drug overdoses than ever, more suicides, more addiction. people dying alone in hospitals because of COVID policies. Like, it's just like, it actually makes me feel nauseous. But where I kind of wanted to go with that was, newsflash, here's a truth for everybody watching. The death rate is going to double in the next 10 years because baby boomers, right? Baby boomers are entering into elderhood, and we are not ready for that to happen. Again, as we've seen over the last 2 years, everything we did, lockdowns, everything was to keep the hospitals from becoming overwhelmed, right? So supposedly, exactly. So it's obvious that if that's true, we don't have the infrastructure to handle double the amount of people dying from natural causes over the next decade, let alone, God only knows what else is going to happen over that time. And all the funeral homes in North America are owned by 2 corporate conglomerates. So I don't know enough about all that to really thoroughly comment on it, but I know that we don't have enough funeral homes. We don't have enough crematoriums. We don't have enough cemeteries, but because those industries are also centralized, like just about everything else, there's no free market competition. Like, I can't go and just be like, well, I'm going to make my own cemetery. I can't even imagine what kind of red tape and paperwork would be involved in attempting to do that. So,
yeah.
And I'm Canadian, so I can't really comment as to the whole money medical situation in the States, but I'm just such a Bitcoiner. Like, I might be getting toxic at this point and I don't even care. Like,
go for it.
Anytime there's a problem, I'm like, it's the money. It's the money. Like, I think all of our, I made this post on Twitter the other day, like, humanity's got 99 problems, but Bitcoin isn't one of them. And, that's pretty much it. Like, I just think things are so dysfunctional. So dysfunctional. Our relationship with death is dysfunctional. Our relationship with ourselves is dysfunctional. Our relationship with spirit, our relationship with death, like the whole thing, it's just dysfunction everywhere you look. And that's why I really love Bitcoin so much. And, I've only been in it for a year, and everywhere I look, I'm like, oh, well, if we just apply the same principles of decentralization to that thing, that would fix that thing. So, yeah.
I mean, on the one hand, I agree with you. I mean, I think all of us hardcore Bitcoiners just look at, like, once you put the Bitcoin lens in over your perception, like, you're like, oh, wow, I can see how that institution or idea or relationship, whatever, is perverted by the incentive system and the value transfer layer upon which it operates, right? And then you think, oh, like, if we could replace that, things would be much better. Which, the encouraging aspect is there's a hell of a lot of room for improvement, right? And so there's a lot of good that can be done, and I'm enthusiastic about that. But I look forward to a time. What movie was it at the end of, like, Lord of the Rings? Was it they, like, the elves came for Frodo and they're like, it's time to say goodbye, like, and I think because I think they were all happy, like they I'm going to butcher this, but, like, the mission was successful. Like, they put the ring in the fire and everything was cool. And then they're all celebrating because they all survived. And I can't remember why, but, like, Frodo had to die or something, or he was just like, I wasted up my 9 lives and I just need to go. And so he said his goodbyes to the other hobbits. Some Lord of the Rings fan is going to crucify me over this, because I'm sure I have it wrong. But then I think the elves take him away, and, like, they go to the Deathland or whatever. And, like, wouldn't it be more optimal? Wouldn't it be preferable if, like, when you realize, like, you were on the downslope, especially if it was like illness or whatever, you were terminal or whatever it was, and you could, like, consciously say your goodbyes to all the people in your life that were like important. And then you go off to like the death camp or whatever, and you do whatever the fuck you want to do in the death camp with the other people. Death camp's the wrong word. Sorry. I mean,
oh my God, I think you just came up with like a whole new $1 million idea.
I just fucked. Well, yeah, but I fucked it up by calling it a death camp. What I mean is like a place to go and transition,
Totally.
A transition something. And
that's what I want to do. Like,
right,
that's part of my vision is like these elder villages. Like, where do we go where we can be in nature? Yeah.
Right. But like, it's definitive when you, whatever that place is, like, and however we want to refer to it. And like, let's say it's optimized for transition.
Yeah.
Before you go, you say your goodbyes, and it's definitive. So you're like, you say your goodbyes to all your friends and family, even though you're going to be living for maybe 6 months or a year or whatever after that. But like, just so that it's more controlled and it's more intentional. And like, hopefully we get to a point in the future where there's sufficient freedom to do those things. And we shall see, like, I think it'll emerge very quickly, because it'll be evident like which approaches are most beneficial. It'll be evident very quickly, like which ones to go with. And like, hopefully these sort of solutions will be made more broadly available to people, because
totally,
we've been for various reasons. I don't want to hang it all on fiat, but certainly fiat is a massive contributor. We've been cut off with so much of these, like you said, cut off to ourselves, cut off to nature, cut off to whatever force animates everything and whatever may lie afterwards. I mean, it's perverted our mind and the culture, and that's fostered a feedback loop of ever greater perversion and disassociation from reality, really. And I think Bitcoin is going to bring us back to that.
Yeah.
And nothing could be more exciting than being more grounded in truth, and then having the freedom to act upon what you find when you're so grounded.
Exactly. Yeah. I think, it's all about choice, right? Like, we need to have choice as to how we want to live and how we want to die. And over the last 100 years, the amount of choice we've had has been slowly eroded. As now it's like, where are you going to die? Well, in a hospital. Where are you going to give birth? Oh, in a hospital. It's like, we need, and so we've just been conditioned to abandon our own values, desires, wishes, all of those things, because we exist inside of this system that is funneling us all down the same, on the same trajectory. Just same with education and all of the things. Like, we just haven't had these options. So, and choice is what empowers us. When we recognize the fact that we have a choice and that we actually can choose something different for ourselves, for our kids, for, generations to come, that's how we pull ourselves out of this mess that we're in. Like, I think so many people are just completely disempowered. We live in a state of constant fear and anxiety. If you want to talk about money, most people live paycheck to paycheck. So it's like, how can you possibly take the time to self-actualize and identify with your soul and find some sense of spirituality if you are constantly panicked about how you're going to feed your kids or how you're going to pay the rent, right? So it's one thing, and I need to recognize that that's where a lot of people are. That's not my reality, thank God, but that's where a lot of people are. So it's like, come on, everyone, self-actualize. It's like, well, I work 80 hours a week at 2 jobs because, inflation and all the things, right? So that's, for me, like, that's why Bitcoin has such a sense of urgency. Like, that has got to be fixed first and foremost, I think, so that we can return to the place from where we came as human beings, which is, nature, community, the self, the sovereign self. And I think that's been a major point of contention too over the last couple of years. Like, everyone's saying, oh, do this thing and do it for your neighbors. And it's like, okay, so you want me to completely abandon myself for the sake of everyone else. Well, if you have a community full of people who have all self-abandoned, you have a very weak community, right?
Yeah.
And again, it's like, we need to be able to hold these multiple truths, right? Like, in order to be a strong member of a community, a contributing member of a community, I need to be sovereign first and foremost. I need to be autonomous. I need to make my own choices, have control over my life, whatever that means. And so if we have a community of people that are all strong individuals, then we have stronger communities.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. I think that's very well said. And again, it's just the fiat system places so many people in a state of deprivation that is exacerbated than what it otherwise could be. And as you say, like, if you're worried about rent, and if you're worried about like living paycheck to paycheck and all these problems, of course, your attention is going to be drawn away from, things that are probably more important in life, but are less urgent. Like, you can get by with not addressing them, but in the long term, you don't do yourself any service. But if you simply are focused on surviving day to day, and this fiat system puts you in that situation more again than it otherwise could be, then you're going to neglect all that stuff, because it's just, you don't have the bandwidth, you don't have the capacity. And what's really exciting is that if we move into a hyper Bitcoinized future, and with each successive generation, there's a greater foundation of stability and security around one's, optionality in the world, one's ability to move through it, one's finances, then it's really exciting to think of like, wow, like from a very early age, more and more people could have the capacity, could be available to explore a greater breadth of what it means to be a human being in this reality that we all share. Not just like, get on this career path and get this status and get this money. And that's all you need to think about. And if you don't, like you can actually broaden the aperture dramatically and be like, okay, deprivation, we've collectively enhanced, global capital and our relationship as individuals to it. And this gives us a better means at pushing back the chaos and the threats of the world. And we can now reflect more inward and determine who we want to be and how we want to engage with that world. And there's so much, the story of civilization and culture is that constant feedback process where we use the implements developed by culture, be they language or art or technology, to further investigate ourselves and then reapply that back out into the world to expand and explore the possibilities of the world. And we've been placed in a situation where there's been like a governor put on that. And the governor is the government who controls the money, and they've siphoned all that away to themselves and the people that, are aligned with them or control the money with them. And to the great detriment, I often make the comment that I think we'll look back on this period, whether it's 50 or 200 or whatever years in the future, and like it will appear as a dark age, just as, we look back at certain Middle Ages in Europe, and by virtue of the fact that like the Renaissance came afterward, and then now we have the modern era, we look back in hindsight and via comparison, we say, oh, wow, what a dark age. So, where there was relatively less freedom or relatively less lower standard of living or less art or less music or less technology. I think that's going to be the same, not only because of the objective, metrics of today. Look at mental health and look at, all the things that are afflicting people, but by virtue of how much better I think things are going to be once the money can't be corrupted, the comparison is going to be extreme.
Yeah, I agree. It's wild. Like, it's such a wild time to be alive. It's so cool. Like, it's so scary and uncertain, but it's like, oh my God, like that's when opportunity comes, right? Like, that's when the opportunity for change is here. And like, I've never felt better. I've never been more hopeful. I've never been more optimistic. And yet, like, everything outside of me is just going to shit. Right. But it's like, yeah, because things need to fall apart before you can rebuild them. So I just, I have so much to say about everything you just said. And you're saying the things that I want to say also just from your own perspective, which is really cool. I think, yeah. So, I mean, at the top of Maslow's pyramid is self-actualization, right? And I really think that there's definitely something to be said for, doing your own work, going to therapy, going on retreats, doing all the things. But there comes a point where it's like, maybe the problem's not me, right? Like maybe it's this environment that I live in. It's like, if you take a healthy organism and you put it in a toxic environment, and then the healthy organism starts to die, you don't address the organ, like it's the environment that's toxic, right? And that's why I think like Bitcoin just has this potential to elevate us and be that tool of self-actualization, because it actually has the ability and the potential to change our external environment, to remove so many of those toxic systems that we have. And like you were saying earlier, whether it happens in my lifetime or not, I don't know. Like, I really hope it does, but I'm also cognizant of the fact that it could take generations, right? Like maybe we don't see real significant change until after 2140, and I'm kind of sad I'm not going to be here when the last Bitcoin is mined. But at the same time, it's like, oh my God, how awesome is it to be part of like the grassroots movement? And just helping people recognize that. And what I was going to say about the self-actualization piece is like, not only are we governed and we're indoctrinated into this system, and we just go, oh, okay, I guess that's the way that it is. Not only does that happen, but then we also, I think a lot of people, everything is our fault. Like the government, it's actually their fault, but they're really good at telling us that it's our fault. And that just perpetuates this cycle of disempowerment. Like I put something on my social media the other day, and it's like, we always get this like, oh, I'm so bad with money. Oh, I'm a bad saver. Oh, I'm not good. It's like, you want to know who's really not good with money? Your government, right? And we pay them. And it's like, oh, it's just crazy. So there's just such an opportunity with Bitcoin. And this is what I just, this is my message to people. It's like, this is the thing that has the potential to really set you free. Like you can stop being a dog chasing its tail, like people that want to do great work in the world, like me with my death work. But again, the majority of people living paycheck to paycheck, they can't do that work because they're, enslaved to their fiat job and just trying to keep up. And it's getting harder and harder and harder to keep up. So they never get the opportunity to self-actualize because of the system. So it's like, maybe it's not you. Maybe you are ready, quote unquote, to go into the world and do that work for humanity. But your external environment is not set up in a way that's going to allow you to do that. Like that whole human flourishing aspect, right? So this is the choice that we have. And like, how much does it blow your mind, John, that we actually have a choice? Like we actually have a thing. Like that's a fucking miracle. And I'm just like, it makes me want to like evangelize and just,
yeah.
It's amazing.
Well, in prior periods, like, because let's be real, obviously, like whether it's been fiat money or some other form of centralization or control throughout the past, like there's always problems. And I think it begs, I totally agree that we have to recognize the degree to which the environment in which the organism is put in is very determinant in terms of, has a big impact in determining the health and the vitality of the organism, right? But I think simultaneous to that recognition, we have to always say, regardless of the environment, it's still my responsibility to optimize myself and my means of getting through it. Because obviously in today's culture, so many people, whether they identify correctly or incorrectly the problems of, broadly speaking, the world or society, some people have the response to just check out and like burn it down and it's all fucked. And like, that's not helpful to you or the thing, right? That regardless of, and it's always going to be imperfect, right? Even in 2140, there's going to be people like you and I at that time being like, hey, I appreciate like all this different stuff, but there's a bunch of stuff that still needs work. And I'm going to apply myself to the one that I find most meaningful or whatever. So like we have to, I think it's always important to keep that in context. But to your point, I mean, at all points in prior history, like the only response was like pitchforks, really. It's like, okay, shit's not good. It's totally fucked. People are oppressed. All right, pitchfork time. And then a bunch of people die and nothing really changes, or it changes, but only for a little while. And now and maybe we're wrong, right? But we're daring greatly to assume and believe that this thing is a novel means of affecting dramatic change in governance and in money and in value expression and in social organization. And if we're right, then I think what lies on that road is a far better means of transformation as a culture, and as we're finding out as individuals, but taken collectively as a culture, than any means of upgrading things that we've used in the past.
Yeah, for sure. It's like, I don't know. I mean, again, what I think is so cool about Bitcoin is like, we are literally in evolution alongside of it, right? Like we are watching it grow and become what it's going to become. And I don't know if it's the answer. I don't know. I don't know if there is going to be something that takes it down, or, who knows? It's all unknown. We can't look back at the previous Bitcoin we had and extrapolate the results, right? Like we're learning about this in real time. But, so people that come to me that don't know about it, if, they have the FUD, oh, well, how do you know X, Y, Z? And I'm like, listen, I don't. But again, here we are at this inflection point, this climax of history. If we're not there, we're pretty fucking close, I think.
Hopefully.
Right. And it's like, what side am I going to choose? Like it is all, it can be very complicated and layered, and, there's a lot of nuance in all of the things, but do I choose fiat or do I choose Bitcoin? Yeah. Do I choose corruption and coercion and, poverty and war and all of the shit that we've suffered through over the last 100 years? Do I keep my eggs in that basket because I'm too afraid of choosing something different? And I will die on this hill. Like, even if Bitcoin fails, it's like, I'm having one hell of a great time right now. Yeah. I couldn't imagine, I honestly couldn't imagine my life without Bitcoin in it and the Bitcoin community. It's like, if it weren't for that over these last couple of years, my mental health would be in the garbage. Yeah. Like 100%. And to people that don't understand Bitcoin, like that sounds like such a, like, what are you talking about? Like, to say? Computer money is giving you hope and optimism. And it's like, well, yeah, it is those things, but it's a whole mind.
Allow me to explain.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So yeah.
But I think that's such a good point, because, it forces people to do something that I think, again, largely in our culture today, people have abdicated the responsibility for doing, which is getting clarity around your values and principles, because those are the things that are going to orient your perspective and your behavior. And so much of that, so many people have outsourced to social convention or even government dictate. It's right and it's good because others say so, effectively. And this is why I think, once you go down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, you end up having to question and put pressure on your assumptions and your priors and your axioms and all those things, so you can boil everything down to kind of a first principles approach to the very generation of your perspective. There's nothing more important than that. That'll dictate your entire life. It'll dictate all your behavior, all that kind of stuff. So what is your perspective predicated on? And like, what are the highest values and principles that you orient yourself around? And to your question there, like, well, you're going to choose fiat or you're going to choose Bitcoin. Like, it's very clear that the principles and values represented in Bitcoin are those of truthfulness and honesty and fairness and freedom and perhaps others, right? But we can even just look at those and be like,
yeah,
those are fucking awesome ones. Those are really, really good, right? Like, those are the best.
Yeah.
Or you go into this one and be like, unfairness, untruthfulness, dishonesty, corruption,
disease,
lying, deprivation, all this kind of stuff. Like, so like, once you boil it down to what they represent in terms of values and principles, it's like, hey, Anon, are you really going to choose the latter?
Yeah.
Like, the former is obviously the choice. And I think it's large part just shaking people out of the apathy of determining what their perspective is constructed by, because they've allowed it to be so outsourced to other people. And this is why, of course, we refer to sometimes, that group or cohort as the mass, because they're not taking the time to make sure that the perspective that they're using to orient their behavior in their life is constructed by themselves, consciously constructed by themselves, rather than outsourced to whomever for whatever reason. And like we said before, I mean, you can be sympathetic to some degree, because some people are in such a state of deprivation. It's like, man, I don't got fucking time. Like, I just got to pay the bills and all that kind of shit. But which is why I often ask people, like, well, sure, fair enough. But if that's the case, I mean, what makes you think your perspective is valid? Because people, almost everyone has strongly held opinions about whatever the thing is. And it's like I can appreciate not having the time to really dig into what principles and values orient you. I think it's a bit of a cop-out, because I don't think there's any more important task that an individual can do. But let's just, for the sake of extreme sympathy, say, okay, cool. But you can't then turn around and have like presume to impose your perspective on me or anyone else, because it's so unconsciously or unthoughtfully constructed. And so shaking people out of the apathy of that, or reintroducing the importance of determining one's own perspective so that you can recognize things that cohere or align with it when you see them, i.e., if my perspective is generated via commitment or an allegiance to truth and freedom and fairness and these sorts of things, when I see that out in the world, like in Bitcoin, I'm going to be like, yep, that's for me. Like, I'm going to side with that thing and not the thing that's basically its antithesis.
Exactly. It's like to have the values that I have and to not align myself with Bitcoin, to not choose that would just be insane. Right. And I think what's important for people to realize as well is that not making a choice is making a choice. Right. Yeah. So like, not choosing Bitcoin is choosing fiat. And regardless of what your like political affiliation, like I don't even care about that shit anymore. It's like, what do you want? I believe that all humans want the same thing. Everybody wants to be healthy. Everybody wants to be happy. Everybody wants love and connection. And everybody wants that for their kids. Right. And if it's not blatantly obvious by this point that this system does not provide those things or encourage them or allow for expansion, it's so obvious that this system is broken. So if you actually want the things that you claim that you want, like the words that are coming out of your mouth, if that's what you actually want, then it's time to take action and actually make a choice so that that happens. Like, it's clear to me that the government is not coming to save us. It doesn't matter, red, blue. In Canada, we've got green, purple, like we've got all kinds of colors. It doesn't matter what is coming out of their mouth. Like, they are not here to save us. We are here to save ourselves. Stop doing the same shit over and over. Like, that's the definition of insanity, right? Doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. Like, here we are again, you know, going through another election cycle. And it's like, ugh, like if you really want to shut those people up and put them back into the position that they were actually originally supposed to be doing in the first place, then choose this thing, right? Take back control of your money. Take back the one thing that the government cares the most about, because it's obvious they don't really give a shit about us. And put your money where your mouth is. That's just it. Like, that's a little bit of tough love, but like, that's the truth, right? And I'm not really here to sugarcoat it for people, because that's all we've done for the last however many years is sugarcoat the truth of everything and use euphemisms. We can't even say the word died. We say, oh, passed away or no longer with us. It's like, let's just get honest and do something about the situation that we find ourselves in. And again, like, can you believe that we actually have Bitcoin? Like, we actually have a thing that's going to allow us to do something different and create something different. And everything that's coming along, like the whole ecosystem of Bitcoin and all of the offshoots that are happening, that's the coolest thing ever. You know, like, I've always been like a power to the people kind of a person. And it's like, oh my God, this is happening in real time. And it's so exciting.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And so tell me, I probably should have asked you this right at the beginning, but what was your entry point to Bitcoin? Because I don't want to make too many assumptions about you, but by virtue of my interest in psychedelics, I've interacted with a lot of the, psychedelic culture sort of people, right? I think we both probably fall into that category a little bit, and we know what I'm talking about. Just people that are very anti-establishment and very kind of leave me alone to be in nature and that kind of jazz, but also like, it's not uncommon for them to be resistant to technology, and even more so resistant to even the notion of money. Yeah. And I think that betrays a fairly significant misunderstanding of what money is and its role and the different forms of money that are available. But that being said, I mean, what was your initial introduction to Bitcoin, and when did the penny drop and you realize that, what you just articulated, that it is what it is, or that it could be something like this? Yeah. And again, like, before remind me to tell you about that, but we just have such a dysfunctional relationship with money, and money is the root of all evil. And so much of society has labeled money as evil, but it's not money itself. Money is just a tool, and it's all the ways that it's been used that we look at as evil. Right. But I feel like the entry point there for a lot of people is difficult, because we have so many preconceived notions and emotions about what money is and what it means. Like, I always lived in a state of anxiety about money. I put off living my life because I didn't have enough money. You know, how many people do that? And again, I'll circle back, remind me, but people approaching end of life, retirement, like, oh, I'll do that thing when I retire. And I used to say to people in my yoga classes, I'm like, what happens if you die before you retire? Like, real question. And now, if you live to retirement, well, now you've got way less money because of inflation, right? So it's like, anyways. Just a funny anecdote on that. I was in Costa Rica a while back, and there was this very nice girl selling like different magic mushroom infused stuff, chocolates and honey and this jazz. And I asked her if she accepted Bitcoin, and she was like, oh no, like, I don't really care much about money. I was like, well, you accept money. What do you do? Like, what kind of money do you accept? And she was like, oh, I accept the local currency, and I just put it like under my mattress or whatever. She was like, I just kind of see money as like stored energy. So I don't think much about it. I'm like, that's exactly, like, so if you hold your money in that paper stuff, they're able to siphon away your life force when you just put it under your bed like that. And they can't do that with Bitcoin. That's the whole thing. And, you know, I did my best to kind of frame it differently for her, but she was still like very, don't talk to me about technology or money.
Yeah.
But I think it's like once that switch flips and once people like yourself are able to both frame it, articulate it in different ways, and also just live, you know, be a representation of what a different perspective on money and this form of money is, then I think it will start to permeate, you know, those types of people more.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah. I always, you know, when I meet resistance or when I met with resistance from other people in terms of Bitcoin, it's like, you know, I can't help but ask, like, or maybe I already know, like, what's your relationship like with money? You know, how much debt are you in? My best friend is very resistant to having conversations with me about Bitcoin because she has a terrible relationship with money. So of course she's gonna, so I think, you know, there's something to be said there in terms of, you know, we talked about like taking care of our internal environment versus our external. Like there is a lot of work, like emotional work that people need to do around their relationship with money.
Totally.
So me and Bitcoin. So I was listening to a Joe Rogan podcast, like way back 2015, 2016. I think he had Andreas Antonopoulos on there. And I didn't know shit about Bitcoin at the time, but listening to that show, I was like, oh, that sounds like a cool concept. So I asked my mom about it because my mom's a numbers person and does investing in stocks and all this stuff. So I said, have you heard about Bitcoin? Like, it sounds like kind of this cool thing. And she said, oh, don't pay any attention, don't put your money into that. It's blah, blah, blah. So okay. So I didn't. So I do like to remind her of that. Thanks, from that time that she gave that advice. So yeah, it was, and then, 6 years went by and it was last summer that, we were on like lockdown cycle number 2 or whatever, wherever we were. And, I went on a date with this guy and we were just having conversation and he said, do you have Bitcoin? and I said, no, but oh my gosh, tell me out. Like, he just knew from talking to me. And that's how I know, like, I can spot Bitcoiners everywhere. Like, Bitcoiners are everywhere. They just don't know they're Bitcoiners yet. Because if you value freedom, if you value autonomy, if you are a, my body, my choice kind of person, whatever, your value system is aligned with Bitcoin. And it's, we haven't had that opportunity to align our value system with money before. So
yeah, well said.
He told me about it and I was like, yeah, I'm in. He mentored me a little bit through signing me up and then I just went down the rabbit hole hard.
Wow. So it's only been less than a year. Is that what I'm hearing?
Not even a year. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah. And I actually read, one of the first things I read was Tomer's Why Bitcoin. Like when he had it before the book, he had the 21 articles or 24 articles, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
I read that and I was like, holy shit. Like, this is so much more than just money. Like,
he's going to be so happy to hear that.
Oh, he's, I watched your interview with him a couple of weeks ago. And I think it was actually the day that you put on your Twitter, like, do any plebs want to talk to me? But I watched that in the morning, you and Tomer just going back and forth. And I was like, oh, it'd be so cool to, talk to one of these guys someday. And then it's like, here we are. So yeah, I'm definitely in, like, I tell people, like, Bitcoin's a philosophy to me. Like, Bitcoin is a mindset. It is a way of being. And the fact that it is a store of value and functions as money is like, what a cool bonus, it's
yeah. Well, it's almost, it makes perfect sense, right? Because it's able to be an extension of yourself. Like we said right at the beginning, that like money is the thing that most extends your will out into the world, right? Because it carries the implicit values and principles that are nestled within the actions that you take and the actions that you compel or incentivize others to take in a market by offering money in exchange for it. And so it kind of makes perfect sense that would be the thing, and that it would, the more that it could reflect both the qualities of your own limited self, and as a result of being impervious to degradation, express those values and principles with pristine fidelity out into the world, the better. And it's seeming like Bitcoin has perfected at least those attributes. And I think we should expect there to be a lot of good to come from those novel qualities being available to us as human beings now.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And to like bring the death and Bitcoin thing back together, we literally trade our lives for money. If you work 40 hours a week, that's 40 hours of your life that you are, committing to earning money in order to do all the things you want to do and provide and X, Y, Z. So like we trade our lives for money. So even though it's not explicitly expressed to us, like we have these leaders that implicitly give us the message that your life is worth less. Chop worthless in half, worth less over time. So like that is just gross and sick. And that is like, we don't deserve that, Yeah, it would be great to live a life of purpose and make money by doing something that's contributing to humanity. But at the very least, we all deserve to have our time, our lives valued. Right?
Yeah. And unencumbered and impervious to the type of theft that's currently happening. And that's a great way to frame it. Like you give away 40 hours a week. Your life force is devoted to some other cause 40 hours a week. And as we've been exploring in this conversation, I mean, that can get to such a extreme, and it has for so many people, that like it's pretty much all consuming. And so you have to give away that aspect or that amount of your life force for whatever, let's just say $1,000 for easy numbers. And then someone else somewhere else can press a button and get the same, So in that way, they're literally just siphoning away your life force. Or as you said, I mean, it's so insignificant and inconsequential and so worthless to them that they can just press a button and take it from you like that. And anytime you have such a disparity, such a differential in the access or the ways of mediating or managing that life force, you're going to establish a relationship of slavery, right? If you and I have to give away our time for the same amount of financial reward as someone else who can press a keystroke on a computer, well, they can way more easily do that and way more efficiently do that than we can deploy our time and work and energy and life force. And so you just in a very short period of time, you're going to have a relationship where one controls the other. And what do you know? I mean, that's what we have in the world today in large degree.
Yeah. And we pay them
for the service.
That's just
and praise them and glorify them and all this crazy shit.
Oh my God. Yeah. It's like, we just had tax season and there's 6 million Canadians that aren't allowed to get on a plane because they're not vaccinated. And it's like, how do you guys feel about giving your money to your government when you're a fucking prisoner in your own country? Like, it's just ludicrous.
It's lunacy.
It's just
complete lunacy.
It's just ludicrous.
Being that this is so new to you, I mean, one of the things that I find most fascinating about all this is pretty much what we've been discussing, but it's how Bitcoin tends to change how people see the world and how they see themselves and how they see the future and all these things. And by virtue of that changed perception, you change because your perception dictates so much of your behavior, perhaps all of it. So, I mean, how have you noticed, like, how have you changed since last year when the penny dropped with Bitcoin for you?
I really feel like it was just the last piece of the puzzle for me. And what I mean by that is like, there was a lot of choices that I made leading up to Bitcoin coming into my life. There was a lot of choices I made, again, like that whole taking action on your values. Like, am I going to play this game or am I not going to play this game? Like push kind of came to shove for me, right? Like freedom, sovereignty has always been one of my highest values, but I didn't really understand why or what that meant exactly until I needed to make these choices, like do this thing or this is going to happen to you, right? Like abandon your beliefs or this is what's going to happen. I'm like, you know what? I have always considered myself a strong person, you know, mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually. So it's like the rubber hit the road basically. And the amount of belief that I have in myself, I guess, like my own sense of self-worth and my own capabilities and ability to do what you said, like really examine my perspectives and be like, well, is this just lip service or is this actually who I am? Right. And I will choose the hard thing in the short term in order to be at peace with myself over the rest of my life and at my death. Right. So I just feel really empowered and just really at home with who I am and like really, not just okay with who I am, but like proud of who I am. You know, like all of the things. And again, I can look back now and be like, oh yeah, I've always been on this path, but I was on the path kind of in the dark, right? Like I was feeling my way through and still looking for external forms of validation and, you know, what lies ahead and what is my work, what is my contribution. And it's like, I'm still on that path, but now the path is clear and nothing is going to stop me. Like I can't not do the work that I'm doing because it's no longer a conscious choice. Like it is my being, like it's how I show up in the world. Right. And maybe more things will come in as I continue to age and evolve and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, there's just, I don't know, so much clarity and groundedness and all the things.
That's really well said.
Yeah.
And I can appreciate a lot of that. You know, I think it's also the case that not only, like we've already discussed, like when this thing that so aligns with those principles that you've been refining your appreciation for over the years is now extensible and shareable out into the world. I mean, that certainly allows you to think that it could be a kind of a force multiplier for change, whereby your just little old self without such a tool could not be. But I also think so many of us are being emboldened by the fact that, okay, we've reflected or experienced or refined our appreciation of certain principles, like we've been discussing, truth and freedom and fairness and these sorts of things, and doing our best perhaps to orient ourselves around them in a world that mightn't necessarily be optimized for appreciating those things. But now we see this thing that is a distillation of those very same principles, and it's so rapidly accruing value in the distributed marketplace, and that people are sacrificing their, the proceeds of their work, i.e. their money, to that thing, to avail access to that thing. And so I think that validates the value of those principles to a certain degree, to say like, no, you were right to perhaps stubbornly adhere to those principles and not corrupt yourself, and to continue to try to understand them and refine them. And now there's an external reflection of them, and look how much others like you are valuing it, and look at what it's potentially capable of doing. And I think that just basically the internal message is, yeah, you were like more, right? You were, that was the correct, you were on the right path there. Now just like, you know, kick up the speed or, you know, get on a different vehicle, or whatever the metaphor is. But like these values and principles that perhaps many of us felt were being suppressed or underappreciated in the world, maybe they're making a resurgence now, and they're doing it through this mechanism and through all of our interaction with this mechanism. And like, what's better than that we're going to exist in an environment where what we deem to be the highest values and principles are going to be upregulated as a result of how much people value them and appreciate them and can express that.
Yeah, I think it's just such a beautiful convergence of technology and humanity, right? It's like, I think there's a misconception out there that Bitcoiners, you know, Bitcoiners want to live in the metaverse, right? Like Bitcoiners are like, they're all into this online world.
Couldn't be further from the truth.
Right? Or they're all into money. I'm like, no, like Bitcoiners want to homestead and like homeschool their kids and have babies and, you know, so it's just such this cool, like, you know, being in the yoga space for 10 years, it's like all the yogis, you know, we dream of this utopia where we don't need money and everything's just love and barter. And it's like, yeah, okay, that's a nice idea. But the reality is we've always had a medium of exchange. We've always needed money to get the things that we can't get, whatever. So let's just have a better money. Let's just have a money that actually supports human flourishing. And it's like, you know, there's always that, like, is technology going to be used for good or for evil? And I just think Bitcoin is the technology that's going to be used for good, whether you're in it for the philosophy, the mindset, or if you're in it as an investment or, you know, for your kids, your legacy, for your, like, whatever it is, we're all on this like freeway. We're all driving in the same direction towards Bitcoin. And it's like, the beautiful thing about it is the diversity of the community, right? Like all these different minds coming together. And, you know, my brain kind of glazes over when I listen to the real technical, you know, dev stuff and the stocks and all. I'm like, yeah, okay, cool. But, yeah, it's just such a beautiful representation of what is possible for humanity going into the future. And that's what I love about, you know, Elon Musk. Like he's, you know, we should be excited about the future, right? And so many people every day, like there's so much fear, there's so much uncertainty, there's so much like, oh my God, war, oh my God, climate change, like enough of that. Like I've just had enough of it. And we can get excited about something better coming.
Yeah. So and that's so important, because if you feel like it's doom and gloom, that doesn't call forth much from you. Exactly. Right. But if you think, holy shit, it's going to be awesome. Like I want to make sure I'm as capable as possible to avail of that awesomeness and contribute to it and enjoy it and all that kind of stuff. Well, then that changes your perspective in the here and now, right? It brings a vibrance to your life because you're sensitized for trying to move towards something that you're excited about versus trying to almost withdraw from something because you're so scared by it. And that affects your here and now as well, because you end up withdrawing and you end up feeling like there's no reason to investigate or mine yourself for what's best about it and try to bring that out and transmute it into the world in some way. And so I think that's a very good point. And I think Bitcoin is very much having that effect on people, to say the least. My last one for you, mentioned like your yogi friends and stuff. How's the orange pilling been going in that domain?
It's going. I do, like, I've hosted some webinars for people and I've got some people orange pilled. It takes a while, you know, it takes a while. I'm still working on my mom. I got her a hardware wallet for Mother's Day, even though she doesn't have Bitcoin. So it's like, when she gets Bitcoin, it's going to be in cold storage. Nice. But, it's just, you know, people have to be ready. You know what I mean? Like, it's like if someone comes to you and they're looking for advice, how many times do they actually go out and follow your advice? They might be ready to hear it, but they're not actually ready to do it. So there's like this familiar hell versus an unfamiliar heaven, right? It takes courage to do something that you're not certain about, so I think it just takes people time to arrive at that place. So I'm just trying to live my life and show people how stoked I am. And they're like, why are you so happy all the time? Like, what?
Wherefore art thou so stoked?
Yeah, exactly. So, they're getting there. My one friend just sold his house and I was like, okay, well,
put it all into Bitcoin.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah.
And you're doing a podcast, right?
Yeah.
Is it called Death and Bitcoin?
Called Death and Bitcoin. Yeah, it's on Spotify.
Amazing.
And I started doing that because, like I said, so often I'm just having these conversations with myself. So I might as well stick a microphone in front of my face.
Yeah. Well, that's how this one got started several years ago now, but it was just like, I'm going to go crazy unless I have a partner to have these conversations with,
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I've loved podcasting for so long. It's always been one of my goals to have one and be on one. So yeah. So
well,
that shit's starting to happen thanks to Death and Bitcoin. It's like
awesome. Well, look, this has been awesome. And I appreciate you taking the time and sharing your journey and your experiences and your thoughts with me. I love this, getting to connect with Bitcoiners out there in the wild and hearing the story. And, just there's so many good people out there, and using this as a mechanism or a means for connecting with them has been definitely one of the biggest highlights of it. So I appreciate you taking the time. And any last words? Go for it.
Well, I'm probably going to have a nap after this. I'm like, it's been amazing. I mean, I don't know what else to say. Just life can't get much better. I do want to say I'm leaving Canada. I sold my house. I bought a camper van. I'm coming to the States. I want to travel and meet Bitcoiners, and I'm just really curious about, orange pilling people that don't know they're Bitcoiners yet and having those conversations. So, maybe
That's
I'll
awesome.
see you on the road at some point.
Coming to a town near you.
Yeah, totally. So yeah.
Cool. Well, look, I hope I did the camper van thing in Europe a few years back, and it's incredible, the freedom and the people you meet and all that kind of stuff. And especially if you kind of focus it around Bitcoin and shouting out like on Twitter, if you're rolling through a town and maybe someone responds, it's like, yo, come here, we'll go grab dinner and drinks and whatever. It's an awesome way to meet people. So I hope that goes well.
Thanks.
And
this is my second time around doing van life, actually. But the first time I didn't have a mission. Like I wasn't, there was no goal. So now it's like, I'm on a mission.
Well, I'll have to check in 6 to 12 months and see how the mission went and get an update then.
For sure. Yeah.
Awesome. All right, Erin, thanks again and take care.
Thanks, John.
Be well.